Well, as you can see, camera number 1 is back together again. I got all of that, had to do all the reassembly, of course, put the front back on, get the film plane to lens mount distance correct, recouple the meter, all that exciting stuff. But it's all done. Everything's back together and the camera now really is ready to have the leatherettes put back on it. So I'll do that, we'll do it quickly and then we're done. So I'll start with the base of the camera, which I think I did with the last camera, which was 2 or 3, I can't remember which one I did last, 3 probably. Okay, so we've got the same thing again. These 2 tabs need to be glued in, so I'll get the adhesive. Just put a spot of adhesive on this piece of paper. That's far too much. That's okay, we'll deal with it. Just put some adhesive on that little aluminium disc. Pop that into position. Now, as I said earlier, these are simply there to stop your leatherettes from showing an obvious dimple. And those 2 little hollows that you see, those 2 little indentations, they exist because this is the same casting as is used for the Retina Reflex S camera, and the adjustment for the mirror would take place at this point on the Reflex S, and this little piece here would hold a spring for the capping plate catch. Right, so let's all put that to one side. Let's get some adhesive on this leatherette from the base. These leatherettes, as you may have noticed, are considerably cleaner than the leatherettes on the other cameras, and it's because this particular camera had never been taken apart before. All the other cameras I've been dealing with here had been serviced on multiple occasions, had multiple layers of adhesive on the leatherettes. The old adhesive had never at any stage been cleaned off, and so they had got lumpier and lumpier over time. And of course that means that here we are 60 years or something after the camera was made, and it looks considerably uglier than it would have done originally, simply because people hadn't taken the time to do a tidy job of putting everything back. Okay, let's get this leatherette on. And this adhesive is designed as a contact adhesive. I don't use it as a contact adhesive. The contact adhesive, if you're using it in that way, you would coat both surfaces, then you would wait until it tacked up, and then you would put the leatherette in place. You would have no opportunity to reposition the leatherette. If it was less than perfectly positioned, that was tough, you're stuck with that. Right, let's get that round there. and that would be a major nuisance. Why is this not lining up? That's better. Now we're cooking with gas. That's a phrase that won't be used much in a decade or so. It seems to be that around the world there seems to be a great enthusiasm to deprive people from the opportunity of cooking with gas cooktops, presumably in favour of reducing CO2 emissions or something of that nature. So the phrase cooking with gas will cease to have any relevance to future generations, unless they make an exception for barbecues perhaps. Alright, I'll get this leatherette patch on here. And the back catch cover, the back catch release cover. Oh, yeah, no, it's alright. I was panicking there for a moment. I thought I'd forgotten to put something in place, but it doesn't belong here at all. So I'm just feeding the screw up through there. Fit the spring into position. I'm racing against the clock here because I see that the video camera is telling me that its battery is tired and wants to go to sleep. That one down, check that that moves freely and smoothly. Snug those screws up, check that leatherette on the base of the camera, looks very neat. Now I never removed the leatherette from the back of the camera on this one because it was in such good condition, so that part we don't need to worry about. Here is where you tension the meter cord on this camera, and I think that's tensioned as much as I need to. I can probably make one last adjustment to that if I decide I want to. Let's slacken that screw off. Yeah, just give it that much tension and no more. Make sure that's snugged up. And the disc that covers that, like the little aluminium discs that covered the hole in the at the bases of the base of the camera, is this thing here. Just apply a little bit of adhesive around the edge of it. You don't want lots and you don't want great puddles of it because you don't want any running in there and jamming things up. That'll fit on the front of the camera like that. And I just need to do the leatherettes on the front of the camera. I'll just change this battery. Right, better get this leatherette sorted out. For larger pieces of leatherette like this, you can apply the adhesive directly to it and spread it out with a toothpick. For small pieces of leatherette, your best bet to avoid making a mess is to apply the adhesive to another piece of paper and then transfer it over to your leatherette using a toothpick or something similar. So here I'm doing my best to get an even coverage of the adhesive and make sure I get cover right to the edges. Making sure that's all even and there's no puddles like in that corner. Right, that should go nicely. Let's bring the camera back in. Take my leatherette and slide it in under the edge here of this black trim. Get it centered between the top and the bottom chrome rails, and then I'll stand the camera up on end and pull the leatherette back and make sure it's tucked into the hinge there. While the adhesive is still fairly soft and runny, you can rub any away with your fingers. And here I'm just making sure that the piece down in the corner here is stuck down well. You'll often find that the leatherettes are shrunken a bit. They don't cover right up to the edges, top and bottom. Make sure you get them centered so that you've got a small gap at top and a small gap at bottom and they match. That will look far, far better than having them a big gap at one end and no gap on the other. Alright, that looks pretty good to me. Use the tail of my tweezers just to make sure that that's pressed down firmly down there. And the same at the bottom. Just a little patch there where the adhesive had got round to the front. Okay, so that's that piece. One last piece here next. I'll get that sorted out. This one's a bit trickier because you have to, for one thing, they're a bit short. They don't tuck in under the edge or stay tucked in particularly well. And the other thing with them is that you're trying to get them tucked in neatly round the side where the back catch is, so that the leatherette must be sitting down nice and flush there. Otherwise, every time you close the camera back will catch the edge of the leatherette, and inevitably that'll damage it. If you allow that situation to carry on, it'll damage the leatherette. You'll end up with it peeled up or torn at that edge. Which brings me to another point about leatherettes, that often if you've got a peeling leatherette, often it's better and you will end up with a better result if you remove the leatherette completely from the camera, clean it up, apply your adhesive and glue it back down in place properly, than if you were to just lift up the edge of the leatherette where it's loose and put some adhesive underneath that edge. Right, so I've done the same thing here. I've Pop the leatherette on, got it tucked in under this edge here. Now I'm pulling it up towards the hinge, towards the back catch, making sure it's tucked into that edge. And I'll have a look at this end and see if it's still tucked in underneath, or at least is nice and hard up against that edge or close to it. That looks pretty good. Make sure the corner's tucked in. I'm looking at the state of this leatherette to see whether it's under that edge or not. It's not really, it's just right up against that edge. That's okay. That's normal really, because the leatherettes simply, the leatherette on this side is often a bit short. They were made like that. Why they were made like that, I'd say it was just an oversight in manufacturing. They could get by with it, no problem at all, when the leatherettes were brand new and they were assembling the cameras. But over the years, as the leatherettes shrink just a little bit, it becomes a bit of a nuisance and a problem. And that's true for leatherettes that have been on a camera. They're usually in better condition really than leatherettes that have been new old stock that have been sitting in an envelope somewhere. If they haven't been stored correctly, they often shrink back much, much worse. Okay, so that leatherette looks good. So there's not much more to go on this camera now. We do need the nameplate. And because this is much, much smaller than a piece of leatherette, I will most certainly be applying some adhesive to it second hand using this method. So I'll make sure I know which way up the label goes first. Get a very thin and even coating there. Obviously you'll get no stick where that hole is, but around the edge you do. And that name label will sit neatly into that recess. If everything's good, that sits pretty much flush with the surface here. If it's got great gobs of glue behind it, it might be sitting proud, in which case it would be vulnerable to being peeled off accidentally, I would say. You could catch it on things. But that's sitting nicely in the recess. And that means that that camera, camera number 1, is also back together, functioning and looking tidy. So we'll get I'll bring the other 2 in, or 3 really, and we can have a discussion about their problems, what needed done, and what state they're in now. So here we have the 4 cameras. The 3 we started with, and number 4, which was only brought in to show you the cord tensioning mechanism. So they're all looking, this is 3. Now 3 was the non-functioning camera. The shutter didn't go on 3, and the reason the shutter didn't go on 3 was that somebody serviced it, but they've put absolutely nothing in there in the way of lubrication. As a result, things wouldn't move. There were various other minor problems, but that was the main one. Number 2. 2 was the supposedly functioning camera. This one was said to be in proper working order. Of course it wasn't exactly, but there we go. Number 2. Now the problems with number 2, well, it couldn't possibly have focused things correctly because it had none of the spacing washers in the front, so that the spacing between the lens mount and the film plane could not possibly have been correct. It had other problems. I had to replace the window here at the top. In fact, I had quite a bit of work getting that tower back on there, that cover, because this had been smashed off on an earlier occasion, and the edge in here was all very damaged. It's actually held, there's a little bit of epoxy holding that in place now. And number 1, well, number one was always the prettiest of the three cameras. This is the camera that had never been serviced before. It was an early production example, and we could tell that immediately because the aperture scale only went up to f2.8. The other ones all go up to f1.9. And they were the three potentially good cameras that we started with, and now they are three good cameras. They all look pretty tidy. Camera number two, the leatherette on the base of that, we lost the end of that. I had to cut in a patch off something else. That looks tidy enough, you wouldn't know there was anything wrong there. This is the camera that's got someone's details engraved on the back. Kevin E. Jeffrey, Waikaia, Southland, New Zealand. That's quite nicely engraved in there too. That's interesting. Here's three. Three looks quite tidy now. The leatherettes on three weren't as bad to deal with. The really bad leatherettes were the leatherettes on camera number two. The amount of adhesive on there was awful. And this one is camera number four, and this was sort of, well, it's almost a joke camera really. Look at the state of that. That has got to be the world's ugliest functioning Retina IIIS camera, I would imagine. It's a relatively early example. I think this one has a meter that only, the meter scale is only goes up to ISA 1300 on that one. The same as the first camera, camera number one. This had a different cord tensioning mechanism in it. The cord tensioning mechanism in this one was a roller. It was sprung loaded, but it was sprung loaded with a coil spring on the bracket. And 2 and 3, the tensioning system, the little pulley was on the end of an arm, and that arm was sprung loaded. They were different. So here we have our 4 cameras. They're all looking, well, they're all good functioning cameras now. They'll be needing new homes. Someone's already spoken up for one of them. I'll put these aside. Next thing I want to do is deal with the lenses. As a matter of fact, I've already dealt with one of the lenses, but we'll pull another one up and I'll get 2 different examples of the 50mm f2.8 Xenar lenses, and we'll strip them down. They'll be very similar inside. They look a bit different on the outside, but I'll show you how you strip them down, service them, and make sure they're fit for use on these cameras. Well, I've got 3 standard lenses here that I'll strip down and service to show you how it's done. This is one of the earlier 50mm f2.8 Retina Xenars. You can see these ones, they've got no knurled edge on the front. Focusing was by the knob only. Later ones, like this, have got a knurled edge on the front of the focus ring. You can use that to focus as well. It's also got the knob, but it's got this knurled ring on the front of the focus ring. And here I've got the 50mm f1.9 Retina Xenon lens. And these are not you can use these on a Retina IIIS. They certainly work. Make sure you get one with a serial number that's, I think it's below 8 million, I think was the story. It might have been higher than that. Later ones don't have the rangefinder coupling. That brass curve that you see there, that's our rangefinder coupling. All of these lenses have got one. But if you get a late model lens, you'll find it has no coupling. And they don't work on your 3S. And what's this one here? Here's a late 50mm f1.9 Xenon. Now this one, you'd think that would be a marvellous choice for your 3S because the hood you see it obscures some of your finder in the 3S, and this one of course has got no integral hood at all. This would be a great choice for the 3S. It's a later one, probably from the Reflex 4 era, possibly even the Instamatic Reflex era. It has no cam. It won't work with your 3S. The cam, let's put these lenses in the same orientation. Okay, see here, this is the early lens. We've got a cam here, and on this lens there's nothing. There's no machining there. It's not capable of doing it. Would it be possible to take the guts, the front guts here, and fit it to the rear guts here? Well, very likely. I haven't done it. Might be an interesting project for some time in the future. But that's the secret anyway. That one there, the serial number on that lens is 10 million. I'm told anything below 8 million is safe to go. That one's below 8 million. I think there's some grey area in between those. So, these 3 lenses to be stripped down and serviced. And I think we'll deal with the 2 Xenars first. There may be some slight differences in construction with these lenses. There won't be anything serious. Later lenses, well, you'll see once we get into them.